Coming up on this episode, the rise of Victor Wembanyama and what it means for Golden State's expectations and potential roster plans moving forward, plus a major Kristaps Porzingis problem that might be unavoidable for the Warriors as they prepare for free agency. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Watching an incredible Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals between the San Antonio Spurs and Oklahoma City Thunder on Monday, and it was hard not to watch it without being resigned to the fact that the Warriors are a fair way off when it comes to these two teams at the top of the West. And specifically watching Victor Wembanyama, you have to think to yourself, how do Golden State possibly compete with this guy over the next few years? An incredible performance from Wemby. 41 points, 24 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 blocks, just doing things that we've never, ever seen before on an NBA floor. And he might have reached the pinnacle already. He might already be the best player in the NBA. He came up in Game 1 against the reigning back-to-back MVP in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and was so much better, it wasn't funny. Like, it just was incredible how impactful he was in that game. Played nearly 50 minutes. And I think if you're the Thunder, you look at it and think, we're still in a reasonable position. We could still go on and win this series. And even if we don't, we've got so much young talent. We've got so many assets available to us that we could make some moves to try and make up the gap between themselves and the Spurs, if there is a gap, right? Or if there's a gap that opens up through Wemby's rise here in the next couple of years. But for other teams like the Warriors, and particularly teams in the Western Conference, I think teams out east would say, well, you know what? We don't have to play this guy in the playoffs until the NBA Finals. And if we reach the NBA Finals, then we'll give ourselves some kind of chance. If you're a team like Golden State in the West, you suddenly have to change your thinking a little bit, both on your expectations moving forward and then like the roster plans, I suppose. And it's weird to think that one guy could adjust your thinking when it comes to what you do on the trade market or free agency, how you manage your payroll and stuff like that. But I think it's ultimately very important to look around the league, and in particular that one guy in San Antonio, and understand where you're at as a franchise. Now, that also has to be balanced if you're the Warriors by looking internally and saying, you know what, we just owe it to Steph Curry to be some kind of playoff threat, at least a playoff team, a couple of years here over the remainder of his career. So it is a balance, but the Warriors have kind of already said it. Steph Curry himself has already said it. Like, it's not about championship anymore. And you're looking at Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs, and even the Thunder for that matter, and you're just wondering to yourself, even if the Warriors wanted to go out and sacrifice their entire future, give up all their future first-round picks for Giannis or someone like that, is that actually enough for the Warriors to be a better team than the Thunder or the Spurs? I think there's real question marks about that. There would be absolutely no guarantee of that. There's no guarantee in sport. That's the fantastic thing about it. And I think the Warriors would be looking at themselves here and saying, you know what, we just cannot man for man compete with a team like the Thunder or the Spurs. Our best hope is to make sure we're good enough to try and be between the third and sixth best team in the West. And if we come up against Wemby and the Spurs or Shai and the Thunder or whatever in like a second round playoff series, then you know what? We've already given ourselves an opportunity. We've already given our fans the reward of being able to watch Steph Curry go up against some of these young stars in the NBA, which I think would be really exciting and thrilling and something we haven't necessarily got. I mean, cool, we got to see Steph go up against Alperen Şengün and Jalen Green last year. Great. They're not really on the same level as Victor Wembanyama or Shai for that matter, or whoever other young superstar you want to put in it. So I think it would be fantastic just to see Steph in a series against like one of those players, even if the Warriors ultimately lost, and even if Golden State went into it hugely outmatched and with a really remote chance of winning. Again, just giving Steph that opportunity, I think, is worthwhile. And then the Warriors know, perhaps better than anyone, what can happen in certain situations. Look at Golden State. They're 12-4 in their last 16 games. in January, and then bang, Jimmy Butler goes down and the season falls to pieces. And not to wish injuries on any player, but like these things are part of the game and part of sport. And so if you just give yourself an opportunity in like a second round series or whatever against Wemby, then who knows what can happen. Maybe you get some fortune, maybe you get some luck, maybe there's some refereeing on your side, injuries, influence the series, like all these different factors that can come into play. I think that's probably what the Warriors should be aiming for, but I think there's no doubt that you look at Wemby and you just wonder, like, how can we possibly compete against that guy? Really, like, it's just, he's on another level. Now, you could also make the argument that Golden State are uniquely positioned to face a team that is led by Wemby and face San Antonio. We saw earlier in the season Steph Curry go off for 95 combined points in a 3-day span, 46 and 49-point performances, perhaps the highlight of the Warriors season. In fact, I don't think it's even an argument. I think that is or was the highlight of the Warriors season. And when you've got a guy who is, I think already, it's incredible to say this at 22 years old, but a guy that is probably the best interior defender the league's ever seen, and yet he's 22 years old. When you've got that guy, then the clear anecdote to that is to have the greatest perimeter scorer in the history of the game. And you'd argue that's Steph Curry. And so I get really frustrated and annoyed when people like Nick Wright are using this Western Conference Finals opener as a way to almost like discredit Steph, because Warrior fans are saying, hey, Steph, look what Steph did against Wemby, in those 2 games in San Antonio earlier this season, or in the Olympic gold medal game in 2024 between Team USA and France. When Nick Wright comes out and says, that's really cute and it's basically irrelevant, like, it's not irrelevant. It's just simple math, really, that if you've got the greatest interior defender in the history of the game, the best way to counteract that is to probably have the best perimeter scorer in the history of the game. So I think that's a very relevant factor here that Warrior fans have rightly brought up. And I think a lot of us should look at Nick Wright and think, man, you're just rage baiting. Like, you're just trying to lure some bait out to Warrior fans to increase your engagement. Like, that's what you're trying to do, because there's no way you can sit there and look at what Steph did against Wemby and the Spurs twice in 3 days earlier this season, and look what he did against Wemby in the gold medal game at the Paris Olympics. Can't sit there and then say, oh, it's cute that Warrior fans think that Steph is some kind of anecdote to Wemby. Well, like, he kind of is, right? So perhaps the Warriors, more so than other teams, could look at this and say, you know what, we actually, with Steph, if Steph's near his best, which is questionable within itself because the dude's going to be 39 entering the playoffs next year. But like, the Warriors do have a weapon to try and counteract Wemby that many teams don't. Like, if you look at other teams who are better than the Warriors, if you look at Denver, for example, or Minnesota, who just obviously lost to the Spurs, like, some of these teams are really good, but they're going to have no chance. They're going to have no chance against Wemby and the Spurs moving forward. Because we're not just talking about Wemby, we're talking about Dylan Harper, who's been absolutely incredible, right? He was incredible in that game 1 performance on Monday. Talking about Stephon Castle. You're talking about like Carter Bryant, who's going to get better as a rookie forward who's already playing some considerable minutes and taking on some pretty significant defensive assignments for them. Like, this is a team that is built to be incredible for the next decade, 12, 15 years, whatever you want to say. And so does that adjust your timeline if you're the Warriors or another team? And I do think here that we might see less trading of first-round picks, particularly from those teams in the Western Conference, because it's like, what's the point of me giving up four or five first-round picks when I'm still probably not going to be as good as Wemby and the Spurs or Shea and the Thunder? Like, what's the point of me doing that? What's the point of me sacrificing the long-term future when what I want in the short term in terms of a championship or making the NBA Finals is probably unlikely anyway? So not only would teams like the Warriors and other teams in the Western Conference look at the Spurs and the Thunder and think, we just want to preserve our assets because we think the gap is that far that it's not worth giving out multiple future first round picks and sacrificing the long term. But if you look at the new draft rules as well, with like the 3-2-1 system, where suddenly if you're in like, there's been no worse place to me than being in the middle ground of the NBA, where you're like in the play-in tournament, like the Warriors have been multiple times in the last few years, right? That between 7 and 10 in the conference, like that's absolute middle ground where you're not really competing for a championship. You might just scrape through to the playoffs, but you know what? You're probably going to lose in the first round. Maybe if you're the Warriors last year and you finished the season so well that you've built that much momentum and you come up against a young Rockets team, you can go to the second round. Otherwise, what are you really doing? Because you're not necessarily giving yourself a great shot at a higher lottery pick. Well, now things have changed because the new draft lottery rules mean that if you are in that middle ground, you actually kind of have the best opportunity. The bottom three teams now in the West, in the league, don't have the same percentage of getting the number one overall pick as teams 4 through 10. So the kind of flatlining of odds in the draft lottery means that you actually can be a middle ground team. Like it'd be far better if the Warriors had made the playoffs this season and missed next season because they would have got a better chance of a higher pick than what they've ultimately landed 11th overall. So between the dominance of Wemby and the Spurs and the Thunder and the draft lottery rules, like I just don't think we'll see teams just handing away first round picks, right? You're not going to see the New York Knicks give up 5 first round picks for Mikal Bridges ever again. Like you're not going to see that kind of move, I wouldn't have thought. Even Giannis, like there's been reports that like the trade market on Giannis is like lukewarm. And I think some of these teams, again, a team like the Warriors would be like, am I really giving up my entire future for Giannis Antetokounmpo? Now, could we be the third best team in the West? Yes. Could we actually beat the Thunder and the Spurs in the playoffs? Yes. But would we actually be favorites in that kind of series? Maybe not. And that's a problem. Like if you're giving up your entire future for a guy like Giannis or whoever it may be, you want to basically say to yourself, we consider ourselves favorites in any playoff series we come up in. We might lose, but we consider ourselves favorites. And that wouldn't necessarily be the case right now with how dominant this guy is. So when it comes to Victor Wembanyama and the San Antonio Spurs, I think they are adjusting the way we see Golden State going in the next couple of years, what the expectations ultimately are. I mean, the Warriors themselves don't necessarily have championship expectations. They're trying to water it down. They're basically telling us, don't expect us to necessarily be a strong championship contender. That doesn't mean we're not trying to make the playoffs. That doesn't mean we're going into any kind of rebuilding mode, but they're telling us what the expectations are. So I think it's pretty difficult for us as Golden State fans to go into a season and think we can't win the championship this season. But that's something we have to get our heads around. And we also have to get our heads around the fact that the way the roster is built could really be impacted by just how far the gap might be between themselves and a team like the Spurs and the Thunder. The Warriors face an issue with their center rotation and really their entire roster in general heading into the offseason, with the desire that Steve Kerr publicly declared last week to get some younger legs and more availability heading into next season. Kristaps Porzingis, therefore, becomes a really interesting and integral piece to what the Warriors are hoping to do this offseason. I've long thought that the Warriors would be trying to keep Porzingis, but I feel like the tide has suddenly began to turn a little bit in regard to that over the past week, based on Kerr's comments. And then Tim Kawakami of the Warriors Plus Minus podcast and also of the San Francisco Standard has been really heavy in the past few days on the idea that the Warriors are unlikely to keep both Porzingis and Al Horford on the roster next season. Now, the Warriors have said that they want to keep both, but Kawakami has been very strong on this, to the point where I'll quote him here on the Warriors Plus Minus podcast, said he's, as in Porzingis, much more to me, much more likely to be traded to a team that wants to pay him more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, more than $15 million. So you trade him for a young, kind of athletic player or two of them, and he signs with a new team for $25 million a year. Now, the problem that the Warriors have with Porzingis, and why I still think it's more likely that he remains at the Warriors, is because I feel like people dismiss the fact that you need a 3 or 4 year contract to constitute a sign and trade, right? A team can not come out and give Kristaps Porzingis a 1 year, $25 million contract, and the Warriors like, yeah, cool, no worries, let's do a sign and trade. We'll get another piece or two in here. Like, that cannot happen. It has to be a 3 or 4 year deal. Now, I struggle to see a rival team giving Kristaps Porzingis $25 million a year. I just don't think that will happen. I think it's flat out impossible, dead set impossible, to see a team giving Kristaps Porzingis a 3 year, $75 million contract, where it's not only $25 million a year, but also at a 3 year term that allows the Warriors to get something back in a sign and trade. To me, that is literally impossible. Like, what team, after Kristaps Porzingis just played 32 games combined for the Warriors and Hawks this season, what team is giving that dude a 3 year contract at $25 million a year? That just isn't happening. I would be shocked, based on the still very uncertain health concerns and issues with him and this mystery illness and stuff, which he missed time with at the Warriors after the mid-season trade. I'd be shocked if he got more than a 1 year deal at any price, let alone a 3 year deal. Like, I would struggle to see a team giving Porzingis a 3 year contract almost at any price. Now, maybe if he's willing to like halve the salary he got from this season, which was the $30.8 million deal that he initially signed with the Celtics a couple of years ago. Maybe if he's willing to halve that and take like $15 million a year, and he's willing to take like a 3 year, $45 million contract, which I would find that unlikely, very unlikely. But I also think it's much more likely that in getting a 3 year, $75 million contract, right? I think it's unlikely he takes the 3 year 45, and it's impossible to see a team giving 3 years 75. But if he was willing to take the 3 year 45, then if I'm the Warriors, what are you getting back at like $15 million a year that's worth giving up Kristaps Porzingis rather than just having Porzingis on a 3 year, $45 million deal? Like, I feel like if he's on that money, that's good enough value for what he can deliver on the floor that you might as well just re-sign him to that number yourself. Unless you really think that, hey, we can get a sign and trade out of this, or we got another option in for agency or something like that, then maybe you'd let him walk in that scenario. But if he's willing to take 3 years 45, which would constitute a sign and trade, then you might as well just keep him yourself, because when healthy, when on the court, like, he is probably a $20 to $25 million player. So I do think that's worthy enough value, and you put your faith and your trust in Rick Celebrini just as much as you do Porzingis' health and body over the next couple of years. The dude is only, 31 years old. So it's not like he's super old, but still, like, he's played more than 65 games once in like the last decade. Who is giving him a 3 year contract? No one. And if it is a 3 year contract, it's because he's willing to take a really low annual salary. And then if that's the case, you're just keeping him if you're the Warriors. So are they going to retain both Porzingis and Al Horford? Because I think in an ideal world, Kawakami's probably right. There's so much availability issues or unavailability issues with this team and this roster, and particularly with those two guys as former Celtics championship teammates, that it probably would be wise to just keep one of them. And like Horford, we saw in that playing game against the Clippers, Horford's actually arguably more valuable than Porzingis. And so if he just picks up that $6 million player option, then the Warriors say, all right, we've got that locked in, a guy that can potentially be a closer for us some nights. He's not going to play back-to-back, sure, but like still a really impactful contributor to this team. And then what do you do with Porzingis? Because like you can't sign and trade the guy unless he's getting a 3 year contract. that's why I think Warrior fans and others like dismiss about this is like it needs to be a 3-year deal. It can't be a 1 or 2. Sign and trades require a 3-year contract. We saw that going back a couple of years ago when Clay left. He got the 3-year, $50 million deal from the Mavericks. The Warriors brought in Buddy Hield and Kyle Anderson on like weird contracts where Buddy Hield had 2 years guaranteed and then like a 3rd year partially guaranteed and then like a 4th year player option kind of thing. It was a bit bizarre, but it was obviously enough to make a sign and trade work in that scenario. So I still think the more likely outcome here is that the Warriors bring back Kristaps Porzingis on like a 1-year, $20 to $25 million contract. See how it goes. And if it doesn't go well, then at least that's an inflated salary that's an expiring contract that you could then put other assets with mid-season once he becomes trade eligible to go and get a different piece. That would be my more likely outcome. It's almost like Kuminga last offseason when remember we talked about like the restricted free agency process and the fact that the CBA rules stipulated the Warriors could only take back like 50% of his salary. So even if like a team, Sacramento or whatever, or whoever it was, Phoenix, were offering like $20 million a year, the Warriors could only take back like $10 million. It's kind of a similar situation here, but a little bit different where, again, Porzingis needs a 3-year contract, which I don't necessarily see happening. And therefore, if you're going to want to trade him, it basically has to be mid-season. You have to bring him back first and then trade him mid-season as an expiring contract. Otherwise, I'm just not sure I'm not sure how a sign and trade takes place. And I'm not sure what the Warriors are necessarily getting in that situation either, unless it's some kind of multi-team deal, right? And we'll wait and see what happens. But it's a pretty unavoidable problem, I would have thought, in terms of trying to get a sign and trade done with Porzingis. And there's so many different options floating about. Like, I've seen deals where it's like, oh, well, could you just combine Draymond's $27.6 million player option if he opts in with a Porzingis sign and trade so you could get like a $50 million? Like, that's way too complicated and just so unlikely to happen that I'm not even entertaining it, to me. So I'm going to be fascinated. I'm happy to be proven wrong if he does get a 3-year contract somewhere. I do think, is it 3 years of guaranteed money? I'm not sure. Or it can be a 2-year plus 1. I don't know. I struggle to see Porzingis getting a 2-year contract, to be honest, from anyone. So we'll wait and see what happens, but it's a pretty unavoidable problem. And I think as much as Kerr has said, oh, look, I want to go younger, I want to get younger legs, I want more availability, it still needs to be done. It still needs to be followed through with what the Warriors do in the offseason. And that's going to be pretty difficult because if you lose Porzingis, like you need to find yourself another starting quality center, which the Warriors don't have, right? You're going to bring back a 40-year-old Al Horford. You're going to have Steph leading the team at 38. He'll be 39 by next playoffs. Jimmy's going to be 37 by the time he returns. Draymond's 36. Do you want to bring back a guy like Gary Payton II, who's going to be like 33, 34? Seth Curry's gone. So I understand the thinking behind moving on from Porzingis. I just don't think it's actually feasible. Like, who is the replacement starting center for him? The more likely scenario to me is like, all right, if we're bringing back Porzingis and Horford, it means we have to use an extra roster spot on a guy who can play the 5. Maybe he can play the 4 at times with Porzingis and Horford when they're available. But a guy that can eat up minutes during the regular season, because we're expecting that these guys are probably only going to be playing in 50 games. They're probably not going to be playing in many back-to-backs. Like, the Warriors need a guy like Charles Bassey. Right now, I'm not sure Bassey's the actual guy, but a dude that's like 24, 25, something like that, who could come in and play 20, 25 minutes and maybe even more than that on nights when Horford and Porzingis are unavailable or one of those guys are unavailable, whatever it is. Like, having that kind of rim-running, long, athletic big, I think would be really valuable to the Warriors next season. I'm not sure if Charles Bassey is the exact guy or if it's just someone similar to that? Like, would the Warriors have interest in Robert Williams III or Mark Williams as a restricted free agent, with some rumors that the Suns are only going to bring him back if it's on a reasonable contract for them? Like, the problem with those two guys is they're like really injury prone, so you're not really eliminating the unavailability issues unless, even though they're obviously much younger than Porzingis and Horford. The Warriors look at Ade Mara in the draft with the 11th pick and think that that's a guy 7'3" who at least defensively can come in early and make an impact potentially. But again, like, if you look at some of his numbers in college, like, the dude never really played more than 20, 25 minutes a game. And so year one in the NBA, I struggle to see him averaging more than 20 minutes a game. I don't know. It's going to be really fascinating to see what the Warriors do with their center rotation. And as easy as it is for us to discuss Porzingis' future and the idea of the Warriors moving on from him just months after acquiring him, and I understand the reasoning behind that and the reasoning for wanting to get younger and, have more availability on the roster next season, particularly with Jimmy and Moses starting the year on the sidelines. Like, I understand it. I just think it's also difficult to make happen because you need to find a replacement starting center, because a sign and trade is probably going to be unlikely. And if you let Porzingis walk in free agency, then you're going to want to get some kind of use out of the salary that you've opened up there. Because otherwise, it's just, you're going to look back and say, well, we salary dumped Kuminga for nothing. It's going to be a Jordan Poole situation where we salary dumped Jordan Poole for 1 year of Chris Paul and then let his player option just expire. Sorry, team option expire. So that's going to be a bad look. If the Warriors let Porzingis walk in free agency, that's going to be a bad look. Terrible look. And so I think the only real option here is to probably sign him to a 1 year inflated contract and then look to move him mid-season. Good fish up there, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts on anything that I've discussed during this episode, whether it be Porzingis, Golden State center rotation, what the expectations are moving forward after seeing the rise of Victor Wembanyama. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. Follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. And I'll see you on the next episode.